Again, good morning. Happy Easter. So I want you to multitask a little bit. Yeah, I'd like you to pay attention to the sermon a little bit. But I seriously, I also want you, while you're listening, to think of a spiritual question. Perhaps it's a question that you have, that you've been sitting with for a while. Perhaps it's something that you were conversing about with someone else in the last week or so, or maybe it's something you just dreamed up right here. An example of a spiritual question, it could be like an overtly religious question. It could be like, how is the date of Easter determined? Or why are there 4 Gospels? Or why did Jesus die? Something like that. Or it could be, a spiritual question can also be like a larger question of life, like, what is the meaning of all this? And what is my purpose? Why do we see so much suffering in the world? Why do we experience so much suffering in the world? Why do good things happen to bad people? Those are some examples. Now, and that's all of them. That's it. There's no more to really think about. No, really, that's just like, I'm just scratching the surface there. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about it and really like get one in your head. And I'm guessing most of you have a cell phone with you. I want you to text it to me now, like during the sermon. If you're using the online bulletin, my phone number is under where it says, I'm serious, under where it says the sermon. My number's 301-697-9139. There's the tables on either side have my business cards on them that also have my cell phone. I gave my cell phone to Chip, our pastoral associate. When I think the sermon is over, I'm going to ask Chip if we have at least 50 questions. And if we don't, I'm just going to keep talking. I will talk right through your brunch. 50 questions. Go. I'll talk. Don't write a paragraph. Just a sentence or two, okay? Here we go. Francis Collins is the director of the National Institutes of Health. He's been the director of the NIH since 2009. And before that, he was the head of the Human Genome Project, the incredible scientific effort that mapped the entire human genome. It's one of the great scientific accomplishments of the last century and perhaps even of human history. It's just remarkable. And he is a, therefore, preeminent scientist. And for most of his life, he was an unreflective atheist. By unreflective, I mean he didn't question it. He wasn't deeply thinking about it. He was a man of science, a man of fact, a man of data, a man of what he could prove. And so he just thought that, religion was a bunch of, nonsense. And so he just forgot about it. And then he had a epiphany. And it's an interesting religious epiphany. I can't think of another religious epiphany that's like it. His epiphany began like this. He realized that he was going against his scientific principles. If he's a man of fact and data, he said, I just didn't believe, but I never looked at the evidence. I never actually looked at it to see if there was anything there. And out of that epiphany, he then took a spiritual journey and looked for data and looked for stuff that he could hold on to. And at the end of this journey, Dr. Francis Collins becomes a Christian. He found data on faith that he could hold on to and say that this isn't all just fairy tales, but there is something here. The joy about wearing an Apple Watch is I feel every single one It's a little distracting. This is Big Brother comes to homily. So one of the bits of evidence that he would have looked at, I mean, you look at the evidence of Christianity, you have to look at the evidence of our core claim, which is that Jesus rose from the dead. The resurrection is one of our core claims in faith. And there is a corpus of evidence that historians look at and say there is something here. There could be something here. And one of the bits of evidence that Dr. Francis Collins would have looked at is that no one in Jesus' day was expecting Jesus to die and rise from the dead. He said he was going to. He told his disciples, I'm going to die, I will rise on the third day. But it's like they weren't hearing him. It's like when you watch a sitcom and a parent is talking to their child and you can tell the child's not taking any of it in, right? Would never happen in real life, but on TV it's funny. Or wives talking to husbands and like nothing is penetrating. Would never happen, but on TV it's funny. When Jesus says this to his disciples, it's like it didn't sink in at all. And so when he died on a cross on Friday, they were utterly rocked. They weren't going, all right, here it is. We just got to wait 3 days and it's all going to be good. They locked themselves in the upper room. They barred the windows. They barred the doors. They were scared to death. They didn't know what was going on. They thought Jesus was dead and gone, and they thought that his movement had also come to an end. The women, as we see in the gospel lesson today, head to the tomb, and they're carrying all the things they need to do the final preparations on Jesus' body. He had been hastily buried. He needs to have all the final stuff done to him. So they're carrying all this heavy equipment and paraphernalia out there, and they get there and the tomb is open, which is weird. And then his body's not there, which is weird. And there's this guy who's dressed in white telling them that you're looking for Jesus. He is not here. He has risen. And then this guy dressed in white says, go to Jerusalem and tell the disciples. And Mark ends his gospel with these words, they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. It's kind of a crazy ending to a gospel. And so you don't have to be a biblical scholar to just put yourself in the shoes of these women at the tomb. Imagine their conversation as they leave the tomb and they go back into town. What are they saying to themselves? What I think they're saying to themselves is, what is going on? What happened? Where is Jesus' body? Who is that guy dressed in white? Is that an angel? An angel? Why am I carrying all this heavy stuff? What's happening? Mark tells us that they say nothing to no one. They never do make it to the upper room, I think, because honestly, in a patriarchal, highly misogynistic world, with all of their questions circling around and no answers, the thought of going into the room of boys, locked, and telling them he wasn't there and there was a guy who said he's raised, they'd be ridiculed out of the room, told to leave. We know that the word did get out, otherwise we wouldn't be here. Eventually, Jesus shows up in the upper room. The risen Christ appears, and then he disappears. And then he shows up on the road to Emmaus later that night, and then he disappears. Then he shows up again several other times on the beach, cooking them breakfast after they take a small fishing trip. He keeps showing up, and then he just disappears. And I think the same questions were circling around the boys that circled around the women. What's going on? Is that really him? Are we having a mass delusion? And then the question that sort of undergirds all of those questions is, what is the meaning of this? Because if Jesus has walked out of the tomb, then everything we think we know about the world has to be completely rethought. Perhaps death has been destroyed. Perhaps there is no situation that is so mired in despair and hopelessness that there isn't a little hope. Perhaps there is no corner of this world that no matter how dark, the light cannot shine. But they needed the questions. You even see the disciples questioning and doubting. We see that in the next scene, we'll read it next week in church, is about the disciple who doubted. Who's the disciple who doubted? And we all know that, right? Doubting Thomas. I mean, he's like, I'm not believing that. You guys are crazy. This is insane. No one walks out of a tomb. We all know this. Until, like Dr. Francis Collins, Jesus walked up to him and he saw data and evidence. And then doubting Thomas becomes Saint Thomas, and he goes off and evangelizes the subcontinent of India. But it took the questions. If they said, oh, well, that's nice, forget about it, or I'm not going to deal with this, it's too weird. If the girls did that and the boys did that, we may not be here today. It was those holy conversations and those holy questions, trying to figure out what this all means, not just for us, but also for me, and what it has to say about life. Life before death and life after death. There's a group called the Barna Group. They don't have anything to do with True Leaf. But they're the research arm of the Christian church in America. They do great work. And they just came out with a study with some really interesting data. They said 47% of non-Christians report having unanswered spiritual questions. In this age we live in, where church attendance is sinking and church membership is sinking all throughout the Western world, and this group of people who are not Christians is growing and growing, almost half of them say, I have questions. 39% of that group say that they are, quote, seeking something spiritually better. Like people who don't go to church, people who might not be in church even on Easter morning, checked a box saying, I'm looking for something spiritually better. Almost 4 in 10 of them report that they are on a quest for spiritual truth. Sounds kind of exciting. I want to be on a quest, don't you? And these people who report not being a part of the faith say, I'm on a quest. There are people out there. We have questions, right? Hopefully 50 of them. Chip?
And then some.
And then some. Yay. All right, we can land this sermon then. We have questions and they have questions. And so I'm going to have fun looking through these questions. I'm not just the answer guy. I don't just have all the answers to all the questions. Some of you are way smarter than I am. I do want to use some of these questions that you have in future weeks, sermons or podcasts or something like that. But what I want you to do with these questions, now that you've written them down and you have them saved in your Messages app, is I want you to go and have spiritual conversations with your families, your friends, and your neighbors. Perhaps you're going out to brunch. You're now going to make it. You're going to be on time. And you can sit around the table and you can each go around and talk about what your question was. Or perhaps you're going over someone's house tonight and you're going to eat ham and you can just raise your question. You're not the annoying person that has all the answers. You're not the annoying person that's trying to trick someone into, something that they don't know, but you do. You're wondering along with them. I think there's a strong argument to be made that the opposite of faith is fear. But I also think there's a strong argument that the opposite of faith is apathy. It's not asking the question. It's not digging in. It's not looking at the evidence, the data, or getting on our knees to pray. And so do that today. That's your homework, really. Happy Easter.